several methods of ensuring the ability of the public to comment prior to and during the virtual meeting. It has established these methods. 1, during the meeting, the public can provide public comment via telephone by calling 1-415-655
How long are you going to be on that?
0002 and follow the prompts. The meeting ID is 172-421-8125. Individuals will be able to speak for 3 minutes during the public comment period. Again, to make a public comment today during the meeting, members of the public should call 1-415-655-0002. The meeting ID is 172-421-8125. The line is being monitored by PSTA staff who will inform me, and I will call on you at the appropriate time. The second option allowed for the public is to submit written comments prior to the meeting and by mail to PSTA. However, to date, it is my understanding that we did not receive any written comments. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The third option allows the public to submit comments by email before or during the meeting at publiccomments@psta.net. If the public comments received before or during the meeting are 400 words or less, we will read them aloud during the meeting at the appropriate time for public comment. Public comment that exceeds 400 words will be provided to the board members in writing. Any comments that the public submitted to the clerk have been provided to the board members prior to this meeting. All comments submitted will be included as part of the public record for this meeting and will be considered by the committee prior to any action being taken. When addressing the committee, the member of the public must state his or her name and his or her address. Okay, for the record, I would like to confirm you can all speak and see each other, so I will do a roll call. Joe Barkley here, Gina Driscoll here, I saw her. Heather Gracie, I saw you. Charlie Justice?
He's not able to make it today.
Dan Saraki, I saw you. And Chair Long? She is not here also, correct?
I see her screen, but I don't know if she's there.
Okay. Are there any members of the public on the phone who wish to speak?
There's nobody on the line at this time.
Okay.
Clarissa, can you confirm that nobody's emailed in?
We have not received any written public comments.
Okay, thank you. All right, our first action item is to approve the September 2, 2020 minutes. Are there any comments, additions, or corrections to the meetings? If not, to the September 2nd minutes meeting, rather. Do I have any motion to approve the minutes?
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, who was the second? Heather? Okay, good. All right. Roll call.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this is Commissioner Long. I'm here. I have a little emergency I have to take care of. Can you keep on going for a few minutes and I'll come right back?
I will. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All righty.
Mark me
Okay.
here. I'll be right back.
Okay, thank
Thank
you. All right, I'll call the roll for the minutes. Gina Driscoll?
Yeah, Driscoll, yes.
Okay. Heather Gracie?
Gracie, yes.
Dan Saraki?
Dan Saraki, yes.
And myself, Joe Barkley, I vote yes. So the minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is to approve the state legislative agenda, and Brad's going to walk us through that, please.
Okay, good morning, everybody. What I propose to do is kind of show you the latest version of what our proposed legislative priorities for Tallahassee. Let me pull that up on the screen, and then I'll say a few things, and then ask Ron to add anything he wants to add before we take a vote to recommend this to the PSTA board. Let me see here we go. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so this is still kind of a draft of, and if you have any recommendations on adjusting it, please suggest those. So we've got basically 3 different categories of priorities for the state legislative agenda for next session, starting next spring. One is electric bus funding. And again, this does not require a legislative earmark or legislative action. It's really just letters of support for the VW settlement funds that Florida already has received. Florida received, I think, about $160 million total in VW settlement funds. They've allocated just about $30 million of that in 2 different pots for electric car charging infrastructure along interstates, for school buses, and then the biggest chunk of funds is still to be let out by the Department of Environmental Protection. We're still waiting on that announcement any day now, and working with our localities. We want to thank the City of St. Petersburg's Legislative Committee for meeting yesterday and expressing support that they would lend their support for PSTA to get some of the VW settlement funds for electric buses. And we hope that some of our legislative delegation can support with that. That's number 1. Number 2 is transportation disadvantage funding. These are mostly policy issues. They're once again reviewing the formula on how transportation disadvantage dollars are allocated across the state. And it's mainly an urban versus rural kind of debate about whether or not funds should be prioritized to rural areas that have no other transportation modes and they totally rely on transportation disadvantage funds, versus the urban areas, which have by far and away the greatest demand because that's where the people live, but they also have public transit systems. And so that formula is being debated now. Obviously, we very much favor supporting where the low-income people actually live, which is the more urban areas, mostly for that funding. And then because of the pandemic, allowing the transportation disadvantage funds to act more like other state DOT dollars in being very flexible. Right now, the state TD funding that PSTA gets is use it or lose it. If we don't use it, the funds that we are allocated by June 30th of every year, we have to send the remaining funds back to the state, and they get redistributed. That's not the way DOT funding works. It's usually multi-year agreements, and we think that there's no reason that that flexibility, especially with the coronavirus changing everything, shouldn't be employed. So that's sort of electric buses, transportation disadvantage. And then the third area that we don't really want to ignore, we don't think we're going to have a lot of success this year, but it's not like the pandemic has made providing good quality public transit less expensive. And so we're not going to completely shy away from identifying our funding needs, which is to continue the state support we have always received, to support matching funds for a new Clearwater Transit Center to replace our very old, leaking, dilapidated transit center we have in downtown Clearwater, and support for the ferry. Finally, 7, 8, and 9 are sort of some policy things that we want them to be aware of. We are very supportive of T-BARTA, but we just don't think it should be a win-lose kind of thing, that they need their own separate funding and not taking away funding from PSTA, HART, or some other funding in the region. We are working with the state on updating Medicaid transportation rules. Those are pretty much universally considered not to be working very well. Those systems for Medicaid recipients, which is growing a number of trips. As the economy is struggling, more and more people are going on Medicaid. And then finally, the rules that govern public transit in the state of Florida that are called 1490. I don't think they were created in 1990. I think they were created around in the 1980s and way before TNCs. And so they need to be updated to the modern era. And I know the DOT is working on that, but it's very slow. And hopefully Ron is brainstorming really good ideas on ways we can provide advocacy toward the lawyers at the DOT to updating their rulemaking on that. So again, it's electric buses, transportation disadvantaged, and some policy things that we think can provide some flexibility to PSDA and the localities across the whole state. That comprises our priorities for Tallahassee for the state in 2021. Ron, is there anything you'd like to correct I said or add to what I said?
I think you nailed it, Brad. And I know we've talked about this at our last couple of meetings. The only thing I would highlight is what I really like about 4, 5, and 6, like the new Clearwater Transportation Center, the Clearwater Ferry Partnership, and the Autonomous Vehicle Demonstration Funding is that's allowing us also to get our legislative delegation a little bit more engaged on getting letters of support and having them possibly make some phone calls and living within some existing funding programs through DOT. So that's really good. We're not asking for new money. We're trying to get dollars from existing funds which are out there, which I think we should be very competitive in being able to do that. The other thing I'd highlight is we had a call, Brad and I and a few others had a call with the DOT Secretary Tebow, I guess about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. One of the things they will be working on, which I think will play into our favor on some of these items, is going to be currently on Cis Funding at a state level. 75% of those funds have to be used on road projects. I think they're really trying to look at giving local governments a little bit more flexibility on how those projects could be spent and lowering that threshold to 50%, where there could be more dollars that could go to transit-related projects. And so that will help potentially with some of the items on our agenda, but more importantly, it will really help in Pinellas County because we don't have very many big road projects we can build out. So, by having some flexibility, which is something that DOT, they talked a lot about on the call with us, is they really want to have more flexibility on how those dollars can be spent out of different buckets, but also extend the timeframes as well. I think they realize that some of the timeframes of spending it within a year is becoming difficult for organizations like us to live within. So allowing some flexibility to spend those dollars over a multi-year period as well. So we've already started this conversation with DOT, and we'll obviously start meeting with members of the delegation once you all approve it, once the full board approves as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Brad and Ron. Are there any questions? All right, I have a question if no one else does. Can Ron and Brad, can you explain a little bit with 1 and 2 how we are in competition with other transit agencies, and how does the legislative process work to make that allocation? Is there anything we can do to kind of up our percentage or anything like that?
That's a good question on number 1. On the VW settlement, it really is existing funding that is out of the hands of the legislature. They've already approved the DEP allocating the funds. The DEP, like I said, has this funding in place, has a adopted plan on how they on the big pots of how they want to spend the money, and then they are issuing a notice for entities to request the funds and projects across the state in groups. They started off with just a little bit of money, and they got some school districts applied for electric school buses. Then they went to these charging, car charging stations along the interstates. That was like in April, right before the pandemic, when Ron and Natalie and I were in Tallahassee. We met with the DEP, and they told me they were very excited because PSTA was one of the only transit systems in the state that was actually operating electric buses. So we had some real world experience with these electric vehicles. They were very interested in that. They were very optimistic that the applicants for electric buses would get some of this VW funding, and they told me August, end of the summer, August. Now that was all before coronavirus, so they've been delayed because of that. It's October and they have not issued that pot of funding yet. We're thinking any day they will, and then make an award. I think partnering with the city of St. Petersburg, with Pinellas County, with others, with Duke Energy to be behind us as like a coalition to get this done. I think that will be our key to make us competitive there. Transportation disadvantaged. I think we're doing everything we possibly can on that. We're providing testimony before the Commission for Transportation Disadvantaged. I'm speaking with the chair of the Commission for Transportation Disadvantaged. I think they are looking at these ideas to try to be more flexible with their funds. The hope is that our legislative delegation will be supportive of that and put some pressure on them to do that and get that done. Ron, anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree. And under transportation disadvantage as well, and let me remind everybody, part of that's done through a formula, which every year that kind of gets kicked around about what that formula looks like. Every time they make a tweak to the formula, obviously there's winners and losers. We like to have some consistency with the formula so we kind of know what that's going to be. And the good news is, I think we've had the last couple of years, 2 years ago, we had a formula that was very beneficial to us. They changed that, I guess, last fiscal year and again this fiscal year as well. The good news, some of the funds, Chair Barkley, they moved from transportation disadvantage over to the multi-corridor plan, the course project. There's $10 million in there. That was for transportation disadvantaged projects. A lot of those dollars aren't being spent, so they were able to backfill some of those dollars to make Pinellas County almost whole like we were a year and a half ago. My guess is that will probably continue. And there are some rumors, by the way, that some of that funding may be moved back around. We're not sure where the course project, the corridor study is going to end up at. They just released kind of some initial findings from DOT about a month ago, and those findings were basically, right now with the DOT trust fund the way it is, I'm not sure if there's going to be dollars for, long-term dollars to make those projects happen. So you could see some of those dollars come back over the transportation disadvantaged pot, which would make us hopefully fully whole at that point.
Okay, but my question is, really now you raised another question. My question is, who are we in competition with, and how are those dollars allocated? And now the second question is, since this was last year's fiscal year money, but we haven't gotten it yet. What fiscal year is this going to count in? Because that's going to affect our overall numbers on our finances. Going to drive Debbie Leas nuts.
The VW settlement dollars are done through a grant program, which could, depending on, to Brad's point, should land this year potentially. This fiscal year, which would be nice. And then the transportation disadvantaged dollars would be, we're talking now about the 21-22 state budget year.
Okay. All right. Very good. But we still don't know who we're up against and what percentage we're going to get, right?
On the VW settlement, I think we're up against the other transit systems. I know Orlando Lynx, I think Hart, Broward County are all going to be vying for electric bus funding through the VW as well.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. Do I have a motion to approve the state legislature agenda? Please state your name.
Bob is a leader. I mean, come on. How can you take rape
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to approve.
Okay, thank you.
Driscoll, second.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll go ahead and call the roll on this. Gina Driscoll,
Driscoll, yes.
Heather Gracie,
Gracie, yes.
Dan Saraki,
Dan Saraki, yes. Brad, good job. Good job, team.
okay, and myself, Joe Barkley, I vote yes. Thank you very much. All right,
Mr. Chair, the only thing I have to add there, this isn't about the agenda, but be prepared. This is probably our last month for virtual meetings. So
Okay.
we believe that based upon conversations we've had with Tallahassee, and I'm sure Brad will tell the full board on this as well, October is probably gonna be the last month for virtual meetings. Starting in November, we will have to start having in-person meetings once again.
all right. Okay, that raises a different issue, and that is how are we going to allocate space in the meeting room so that we're socially distant and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Luckily, Julie Cagliostro and her team have been doing a great job in getting us prepared for that day. With the governor's extension through the end of October, the virtual meeting ability, we don't have a PSTA board meeting in November. We because of Thanksgiving, we always have that first or second week in December. So that would be the first board meeting that we would have to have in person. And the game plan right now is to essentially, since we have a relatively large board, we only need a quorum. We need a physical quorum present. So we would shoot for having 8 board members in the boardroom. And Julie's got a really nice, what is about 8 or 9 feet separated chairs and desks all around the boardroom for 8 board members. The other 7 board members would be via Zoom. And she's got massive movie screens all over. It's like a sports bar in there now with all the screens. And then, so you'll be able to see, like, I don't know, Commissioner Driscoll big on the screen if she's got a question. And then, you know, so it's looking pretty good for that. I think once we'll have committee meetings in there, which, you know, are much smaller. We'll have those downstairs because she's got it all set up for this, and that's only 5 board members or so. So I think we're in a pretty good shape once we go live again.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, okay. Any other questions on that, or Ron? Did you have anything else as far as what's going on at the state?
Minus 3+ weeks to the election. That's it.
Okay. All right. Okay, so now let's move to the federal legislative agenda. Go ahead, Brad.
Okay. Hope you can see this. Hope you guys can see lots of your masked faces shoveling some sand there for our event at the Sunrunner event. Of course, that's our number one priority at the federal level, but I think we've got the funding there, and we're already spending it. Construction is already underway, so that's really just thanking them for that support for Sunrunner, and highlighting that it will hopefully be a catalyst for other rapid transit projects in the future. Number 2 on our federal priority list is additional COVID support for public transit. That would come in really handy. Just as I mentioned, the state, the expenses are not going down, and we are actually having increased expenses regarding cleaning and providing masks to customers and our employees as well. We're looking for electric bus funding there as well. We're actually putting together a presentation where we're looking at the infrastructure for charging a lot of electric buses. Actually, thanks to Harry and others, we're putting some applications toward FEMA for charging infrastructure for our PSDA facility, because the idea would be FEMA is looking for resiliency opportunities. In the event of a hurricane or something, can we have solar panels, or do we have an ability to charge buses if the power gets disconnected from the grid? And can we generate our own power? Maybe even have batteries to store some electricity in case the power is out for a couple days, like might happen during a hurricane. So we're making applications for that. If Commissioner Albritton from Clearwater was here, he would be, I think, advocating for number 4 to move to number 1. But we are going to put all efforts toward applying and receiving a build grant. Very competitive source of funding, but one that the city of Clearwater is very supportive of, so that they can have where we are, our current facility, to build their new city hall. We're looking for capital grants for the Clearwater Ferry, for the ferry boat operations in the Clearwater area as well. And then last, and I think Steve Palmer at least was here, he can chime in on reauthorization. They're under a continuing resolution on the FAST Act right now. Maybe in the new administration, there'll be a new authorization bill, and so that's more of policy issues there regarding having our Uber and Lyft rides count toward our ridership. There's been some proposals in Congress to incentivize frequency, higher frequent routes, which increases ridership. And so we're supportive of that. And then, again, we're looking for a robust funding support from the federal level into the future. So Harry Glenn is here. He can add any updates to any of these items on our federal priority list.
Sure. Thanks, Brad. I guess we were going to give you just an update on what's going on in Washington, which I think syncs up with the federal agenda. I don't think anything that's going on now or will go on between now and the end of the year, or even in the early next year, should or will change your priority listing here. I mean, as you know, it's been a very quiet week in Washington this week. There's a lot of whipsaw here on what's happening with the COVID relief. I know that's number 2 on your agenda. It's been a crazy 6 days. The president, last week, the speaker and the secretary of the treasury were making good progress towards a COVID relief bill. I think they were tracking along the lines of the House bill that did include support for transit, additional support for transit. Sunday, the president tweeted out that he wanted to get a deal done and get it done now. And then on Tuesday, he tweeted out a message that said, deals off, no more negotiations. And then on Tuesday night, he tweeted out that he wanted special single issue COVID relief bills for airlines, PPP for small businesses, and stimulus checks. And then Wednesday, the speaker kind of cut that off by saying that she wanted a big bill and no individual bills. Thursday, the president pushed back and wanted individual bills, and then later Thursday yesterday was back on the idea of a big bill. And so I don't know where we are, if we're going to get a COVID relief bill or not. The president's tweet said if they don't get a bill before the election, he'll do one after the election. I think the Democrats were still saying they'll do one after the election, but I don't know what's going to happen. So, but I think COVID relief should remain on your list, because it will be an issue even into the new Congress and next year. So that's the COVID relief part of it. Brad, you wanted Steve to talk a little bit about the current funding situation and the reauthorization bills, which also, I think, relates to your agenda. Steve, you want to talk about those?
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Just real quickly, you recall Congress has passed the continuing resolution, and it's been signed into law that will fund the government now until December 11th. So there is no threat of a government shutdown until then. I say until then, just because, we wouldn't expect one, but given the outline that Harry just gave on just the COVID relief bill, you never know what's going to happen day to day here. That continuing resolution included a 1-year extension of the FAST Act authorization at current levels, so we can continue to expect current funding for PSTA, for the formula programs and the grant programs in which we'll compete for as well. There is enough money. They replenished the Highway Trust Fund, so there's no threat there for the next 12 months for that to be underwater. Kind of looking ahead, one of the things that Brad did a great job of outlining this legislative priorities to Virginia Poe and Congressman Chris's office in a call last week that she initiated. She reached out because she knows that infrastructure is going to be a big issue next year and wanted to know what PSTA's priorities are. And Brad did a great job walking through these, highlighting the ferry, the Clearwater Ferry, the Transit Center, where we are in the BRT and some of the other priorities that he mentioned on reauthorization. The only other thing I have to add is, because even though it's a crazy time in Washington, Congress isn't here. They've gone home to campaign. They are not here until November 15th, the week they're going to be in session, 1 week in November and then 2 weeks in December. Obviously, a lot can happen during that period of time, so it's going to be a relatively crazy time. But one thing, looking beyond this year into next year, we anticipate that infrastructure will be a major bill next year, regardless of who is president. It is probably the one issue that President Trump campaigned on in 2016 that wasn't done during his first term. So we anticipate that if he is reelected, he'll want to have infrastructure a major bill, and then major focus. And then we did hear from Chairman Peter DeFazio of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee last week, that the Biden team has contacted him and said they would like to have the Moving Forward Act, the bill, the $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill that included the reauthorization of the transit and highway programs. They would like to see that on the floor as early as February of next year. So if you combine that with again, chatter that earmarks could return, it could be a very, very busy time for PSTA and for all of us looking to try to advance some of your federal priorities. With that, I'm happy to turn it back to Harry and then answer questions when he's done.
Hey, Brad, just to wrap up, on your list is electric bus funding and the build grant, and we would anticipate if there is an infrastructure package and also with the reauthorization of the FAST Act is going to occur next year, there's a great interest in maybe increasing the pool of funding available for the build grant, which would, I think, help improve your chances on that one. And I think there's also great interest in expanding availability of funding for electric buses and electric bus equipment. So I think, two of those issues will either get dealt with in the infrastructure bill or in the reauthorization of the FAST Act. And as Steve did mention, there is serious conversation going on in the House, at least, not so much in the Senate, on bringing back congressional earmarks. They've renamed them now community-focused grants. So there's this interest in allowing Congress to designate spending by congressional districts. And so, PSTA benefited from that for many years before. A lot of the buses were from earmark time. I think your headquarters building, I think, is even was an earmark, part of it was even an earmark going back. So I think there's opportunity there, and the fact that Congressman Christ and Senator Rubio are both on the Appropriations Committee, I think also would help there. So we'll continue to watch for that. Clearly, you're eligible. I think one of the things we do in the community-focused grant program is restricted to local governments, nonprofits, and universities, and not allow them to be used for public or corporations and other business entities. And so I think that further helps you all out because it, again, reduces the number of entities that are eligible for these earmarked funds. So I think next year really shapes up to be a good year. A lot of interest in transit, a lot of interest, as Brad mentioned, in resiliency and mitigation, trying to do things in a more green manner. So I think there'll be some opportunities there for you all to look at ways to enhance some of the things you're already trying to do. So I think it's going to be, but I think your agenda, Brad, I don't think anything's changed. We've talked about this, I think, at 2 of the previous meetings. I think it's a good agenda, and we should be ready to step off smartly in January.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve and Harry and Brad. And so do I have a motion to approve the federal legislative agenda? Please state your name also.
Move approval, Janet Long.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Do I have a second?
Dan
Driscoll,
Saraki, second.
Okay, I had 2 seconds. Thank you very much, whichever one was first. All right, so I'm going to do a roll call vote. Gina Driscoll,
Driscoll, yes.
Heather Gracie,
Gracie, yes.
Charlie Justice, not here, sorry. Dan Saraki,
Dan Saraki, yes.
Chair Long,
Long, yes.
and myself, Joe Barkley, yes, it passes unanimously. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Is there any other business that a committee member wants to bring up at this time?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
maybe just one final thing that I'd like to ask Ron and Harry and Steve. Just, thank you, committee, for recommending these priorities to the full board. Hopefully, we'll have a meeting at the end of this month, and then that will be the agenda. But I'd like for Harry, Steve, and Ron to kind of, if they know anything about, despite the pandemic, despite maybe the governor reopening, what are new strategies, or what are you hearing about the way in which we might advocate for these priorities in Tallahassee and DC? Is it going to be just like business as usual with in-person committee weeks, us going on trips to DC and Tallahassee? Do you think there'll be more virtual meetings? What do you think we should be planning for into the next year, if anything different than what we've been doing in the past?
Brad, I'll go first. I mean, I think the short answer is, in hearing Steve, they may know a little bit more than we do. At the state level, the short answer is we don't know yet. We do believe there'll probably be some type of limited access to the Capitol. We're not sure what limited access means yet. So, the days of having everybody having their day on the Hill and everybody go up, I don't think that's probably going to happen next year. My guess is there'll probably be a combination of some in-person meetings, but I think a lot will probably be virtual. So what we're telling our clients at this point is, let's plan to have a trip to Tallahassee, and as things start opening up there and we have a better understanding of what type of access that we'll have to take groups into the Capitol, we'll be prepared for that. But if that's not allowed, or if they limit that to the point where it would be unproductive for you all to come up, what we would do is probably do a lot of Zoom meetings like this with members. So we would still be communicating, may just be in a different manner.
Hey, Brad, it's Harry. I think the same thing in Washington that Ron's predicting for Tallahassee. In talking to the House and the Senate, I don't see any ability for the House and Senate to open up to mass visitors. I don't right now, until there's a vaccine and some ability to do that. I don't see that there's any ability to do that. We're dealing with the District of Columbia government, which has certainly ratcheted back things here. And so I think the way you're going to have to advocate is what you've been doing is Zoom calls, much like we did with Congressman Christ's office last week, trying to do those. And I think the House has been very receptive to those. The Senate's a little more difficult. The Senate has a rule that's prohibiting them from using virtual meetings, or most of those meetings are by phone, which is a little more difficult, but there's still, Senator Rubio and Scott's office has been accessible. I'm sure the committee staffs will be accessible. So I think I just don't see doing a fly into Washington, at least through the first quarter of next year. I think it would be summer at the earliest, spring or summer. And Brad, Steve, I don't know if you want to talk about what's going on what your views are on the Hill and also DOT.
No, I don't think anything's different than what Ron and Harry have told you. I would anticipate that, looking ahead even to March of next year, like the APTA legislative conference, I can't see that happening, where people are going to feel comfortable enough to be able to, send several thousand people to Washington and all gather together. So I think, they're both right. I would echo what they're saying in terms of there being a lot more virtual meetings and activity. The good news is I think members of Congress feel very comfortable doing it, and they're receptive to it. Like Harry said, some of the staff are not so much, but at least, we're able to get the information to them, and they're able to at least understand what PSTA's priorities are.
So we will make sure that those legislative priority sheets that I showed look beautiful on Zoom.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank
Mr.
you. Good
Mr.
update.
Chair, I've got one final thing for you as well. This
Yes.
obviously is up to you and Brad and Chair Long here. Our next legislative meeting is scheduled for November 4th, which is the day after the election. I'm not sure there's, and I'll defer to you all, I'm not sure there's a need, first of all, to meet in November because probably not a lot's going to happen between now and then, even though we have an approved agenda now. I think you may want to just maybe cancel the November meeting, come back and meet at your beginning of December meeting. I think we'll know a lot more by then. Organizational session will happen in Tallahassee. Obviously, the election will be behind us at that point. You know, Harry and Steve may know a little bit more about what's happening from a stimulus standpoint at that point as well. So it's again up to you, but it may make sense not to have our November meeting and have our next meeting in December.
Mr. Chair, this
Yes.
is Commissioner Long.
Yes.
I would agree with Ron, and I would move to cancel our November 4th meeting and have the next meeting the first week of December when we come back.
Okay, great. I concur. Commissioner Driscoll?
Thank you. I agree as well. I just want to confirm that we would have the ability to call a meeting in the event that something critical comes up, because especially in this day and age, as illustrated so well by the course of events for this week regarding the coronavirus relief package, things change all the time. And so, although I totally agree that canceling the meeting for November makes sense, I want to make sure that we all keep the door open to convene if something comes up that we should address, or if we need to start looking at changing any of our strategies. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Do we need a vote on this, or can we do this by consensus?
I think we can do it by consensus. That's how we
Okay.
completed the meetings.
All right, is everyone in agreement that with Commissioner Driscoll's modification, that we go ahead and cancel the scheduled meeting in November? We will meet in early December. If something comes up, we will call a special meeting. That
Great.
satisfactory with everyone?
Yeah.
Consensus? Yes. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Are there any other comments or questions for the meeting? Raise your hand and I will recognize you. Okay, seeing none, thank you all for attending. And thank you, Steve, Harry, and Ron for your thorough updates. And this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good weekend.